the material design system in Flutter. Today we're going to discuss how to make material widgets in Flutter. So it's gonna be a pretty long conversation.
Perfect. So, I can also give it a start if you want with my side. For those who don't know me, my name is Mariano Zorrilla. I'm a software engineer. I'm a tech lead on Venmo. I'm part of this owner and community of the San Francisco SP, which is the only Flutter community currently we have right now on San Francisco, which is crazy that we don't have a Flutter community before. And it's also so excited to have you here, Jose, being like part of the Google part. And I think it's the first time that I have a Googler on the event. So thank you so much for being part of this and take part of your day to help out and help the community and everyone else.
No, it's my pleasure. I'm very glad that you're able to do all this. It's quite a lot of work. So that's awesome that you're able to do this huge community. And it's my pleasure to present what I know. I know a lot of the people here have done some deep dives into Flutter. So we're going to be doing a little bit of deep dive into Flutter, eventually make it to the canvas. But I guess I'll just start with the meeting, and then at the end of the presentation, I guess if anyone wants to ask me any questions, I'll just take them. Does that sound good?
Sounds perfect. Let me add you to the stream, and then you can now do all the presentation if you want
it. Okay, so is my screen mirrored?
Yes, everyone can see your screen. They can see both of us and your slides. So if you even pull your full screen, it's not an issue for us. We can all see it.
Okay, awesome. So like I mentioned before, I work for material design, and my team's responsibility is to implement the material design system into Flutter. So today we're going to discuss everything that goes into making a widget. So what is material design system? Basically, the Flutter package is composed of 12. The Flutter framework is composed of 12 packages, right? The material package represents the material design system, and it's basically Google's design system made in 2014. And the material design system is supposed to represent real world objects, where if you lay something on top of each other, it creates a shadow and whatnot. So it's my team's responsibility to implement that on Flutter. The way you implement material is by either using the material widget or the material app. Usually the material app is the root node when you make your Flutter application. And then just by using the material app, you get all these elevations and whatnot. And you implement this using the material app and the material widget, and it does that for you. So today in the agenda, there's going to be 3 main topics we're going to discuss. So designing material widget. Designing material widget is material's responsibility, and basically a lot of work goes into this. We get input from designers, researchers, project managers, program managers, tech writers, other engineers, and just to make a widget. So that's the first topic we're going to be doing. The main topic we're going to discuss is actually implementing, engineering the widget in Flutter. So this is going to be the beef of the conversation. And then the last thing is there's always complications that occur during development. So the last stage is just discussing some issues that were made while creating this and how we got into it, and what you can do to if you see any problems with the material widgets, what you can do at the end. So designing a material widget. The majority of components in material are interactive, and they have gestures, and they're pretty complicated under the hood. For example, in our case, this entire conversation is going to be based off the slider. So I want to discuss the designing of the slider, the engineering of the slider, and the complications that were caused with the slider. The slider may seem like a very simple widget, but we have to handle we have to handle gestures that come along with it, like that. And on top of that, we have to create it. It's a responsibility of material to make sure that we give you enough freedom so your app looks beautiful, but not too much where it looks like Google. That way your app has its own characteristics, and we try to guide you pretty much. There's two main types of sliders. The one you're seeing on screen right now is the regular slider, and then the one you'll see probably in a second is the range slider. So what we're discussing this. Design the material component. This is the third iteration of the slider. So there's two previous ones that we've already made, but slowly, like, we do any updates because design's always changing and whatnot. So recently we changed the value indicator, ticks, and a bunch of things. But just to start off with, there's two main sliders. There's a slider and there's a range slider, which represents how many thumbs are. The thumbs are these things. And basically the slider, when you're interacting with the slider, anytime you change it, you're expecting the change to appear immediately. So the slider is a stateful widget. And when you move it, it represents a number. So you're expecting an immediate response. So usually you'll see the slider like in the settings where maybe you have to dim the sound or something of your application. And this would typically be done with this slider. And a lot of you have probably seen the sliders in apps or websites. So while designing the slider, we had to take into account a lot of different platforms. Google Material is not only on Flutter, but there's also Android, iOS, and web. So for example, maybe the web sliders should be implemented using the native web component. Or if you're trying to implement if you're trying to implement the web component, maybe there has to be some backwards compatibility because a lot of web stuff is dependent on HTML elements, and maybe you have to have the dependence on like 90s technology or something like that. So that's something we have to look into. So when the designer creates the application, like there's going to be states in there's going to be states for it, the widget, the component, and basically you'll see that the slider component has 4 main states. It gets pretty specific. For example, the active part of the slider is 2px bigger than this inactive part of the slider. When the slider is enabled, you can interact with it, so you're able to touch it. But when it's disabled, it uses the on-surface color and the on-surface color is typically gray. So the surface becomes gray, and you're not allowed, and you can't interact with the slider. And then on web, actually, there's also hover and focus support. So if you're interacting with the slider using your tab navigation or whatnot, once you tab into the slider, this overlay component will show up. And then if you click it, the thumb component has a thicker shadow, so it represents that you clicked it. On top of that, the actual mouse pointer changes to this type instead of the one I currently have, indicating it's interactable. And then when you press the widget, depending if you allow for the value indicator to show, then the value indicator will animate up. So that's pretty much the slider like interaction states and whatnot. When making the slider, we have to make sure that they're themable. So when you're creating the slider, like when you're creating your theme and when you're creating your Flutter application, you usually set the theme data in the material app, and depending on if you set the slider theme data, then it's going to be themable from there. But this is a discussion I'm going to talk pretty thoroughly later on. So this is just like a little thing I wanted to show you before we get into it, which is going to be further. It's just we have to take care of designing in the material components, right? And also, lots of research goes into making these sliders. So, for example, what's the optimal amount of like animation that takes for the slider, for the value indicator to go up and value indicator to go down, right? Or what happens if you're left-handed? Maybe you expect to interact with the slider like differently as opposed to right-handed people. I actually got a pretty good demonstration. If like for a lot of us, the language we speak is going to be English, and English is an LTR language, meaning it's left to right. So when we interact with the slider, we expect to interact from left to right, and at the left, part of the slider is going to be the smaller values, right? So like it goes, let's say it goes from 0 to 100. The left part of the slider is going to be 0, and then the right part of the slider is going to be 100. But in RTL languages, like let's say Arabic, the slider is actually going to have the opposite. So instead of the values being like 0 to 100, it's going to go 0 to 100, but from the right to left instead. So this is like the slider. There's a lot of things like this that we have to think about when creating these widgets. Another one is text scaling. What happens if your like eyes aren't that well anymore? Then we gotta, like, the value indicator has a label that you can put in, and when that label gets bigger, we have to worry about how we're gonna handle that. So let's say the label, like the value indicator component, is bigger than the track, then that might lead to a few issues. And then of course, if like even if you're blind, you should still be able to use a material component, because we have a pretty like strict like accessibility like requirements, and you should be able to interact with the slider even using voiceover. So let's say you're on web and you want to interact with the slider, then you use the tabs and the arrow keys to help you do that. And throughout this presentation, I'm gonna describe to you how you do this from the engineering side. So yeah, like I mentioned, the material widget is like, it's pretty specific. The active track has to be bigger than the inactive track. Like tick marks are going to show if you're using a discrete slider. Basically, a discrete slider lets you choose specific points instead of any points within the range of slider. You have to choose like let's say you're using a discrete slider and your values are 0 to 100, and you have 5 divisions, and it's going to be from the points you can choose are going to be 0, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. So yeah. But basically, that's from the designer's perspective. But design research and all that, I'll say, is like 75% of the work, because once we start engineering it, like, and creating it, then we're going to think of scenarios that design and research didn't initially think of. So we got to keep interacting with design and research until in our case, slider is created, right? So now we're going to discuss implementing a widget in Flutter. We're going to talk about some pretty complex topics. If you're struggling to understand, don't worry. These are stronger topics, and I've been doing this for a year and I still struggle with it, so it might be a bit hard to understand. But I'm just going to try my best to explain it as simple as possible. So Flutter is basically divided into 3 main divisions: the Flutter framework, the engine, and the embedder. We're only going to be focusing about the Flutter framework. And you typically, if you're using Flutter, you only interact with the material, Cupertino, and widgets package. You're not going to be interacting typically with the rendering, animation, painting gestures, or foundation package, unless you're doing some more complex stuff. But today we're gonna, throughout the presentation, there are 12 main packages in the Flutter framework, and we're gonna iterate through each different package. So yeah, we're just gonna iterate through each different package, right? The slider widget is part of the material package, and yeah. So the high-level framework packages, they're the widgets package, the Cupertino package, and the material package. By the way, when I say package, I like sometimes people refer to as libraries. I interchange them. So if I say libraries, I mean packages, and packages libraries, right? The widgets package, it represents pretty much any non-biased, like, specific implementation. So if you want to center a widget, you're going to be using the center widget. Or if you need a container, then like basically the widgets framework is going to give you specific unbiased widgets that every programmer usually uses at one point. The material package is the Google material design, implements Google material design system widgets. So these widgets are going to be common widgets that you interact with. So when you use the buttons, cards, chips, these widgets usually come from the material package and have the Google design feel. The Cupertino package represents the Apple design system, right? So in material, we understand, and Flutter, we understand that your iOS and Mac OS clients might have a muscle memory attached with like a widget. The way you interact with it might be different. The way you interact with material widget. So that's why we created the Cupertino package. So you're able to make widgets for your iOS and Mac OS clients. And you might be wondering, like, if you're using the Cupertino package, doesn't that mean like your Android and Fuchsia clients are gonna have like an Apple feel to it? No. Basically, you can handle that. Like Flutter lets you handle that with like Flutter does cross-platform adaptations. The way Flutter handles this is like, let's say you're using let's say you want to use the slider, the Cupertino slider for iOS and Mac OS, and let's say you want to use the material slider for the other operating systems. Then basically you use the slider constructor, like use this like the slider.adaptive constructor. And basically the slider.adaptive constructor is going to check what platform your client is using, and if they're using iOS or Mac OS, they'll give you the Cupertino slider. And then otherwise, if you're using Fuchsia, Windows, Android, or Linux, it's going to give you the material package. So these are like some common ideas that most people know, but now we're going to do a deeper dive into the Flutter framework. So many of you who've ever made a Flutter application, you've noticed that you're able to use a stateful, like whenever you create a widget, it's either a stateful widget or a stateless widget, or sometimes a proxy widget. Basically, if your widget's interacting with anything, then you're going to be using a stateful widget. Otherwise, just use the stateless widget, which is pretty much immutable. The slider widget is a stateful widget, since we had like anytime you deal with any gestures, then you have to have an immediate response to it. The slider is divided into 5 main divisions. There's the value indicator, which is this. Basically, anytime you click the thumb, the value indicator pops up. There's the track, which the slider has. So that's another widget. And then there's the thumb. The thumb is like where you're interacting with. And there's the overlay, which is basically anytime you click the thumb, the overlay is going to show up. And if you're using a discrete slider to represent each value that you can touch, then there's gonna be ticks, and this is the tick component. There's 2 main types of overlays, so it might be confusing. So hopefully this is a good demonstration. But basically, there's a slider overlay, which is this one when you interact with it, and there's also the overlay class. And basically, the overlay class in this instance is the sponge. The sponge floats on top of all the other widgets. So that's the overlay entry. And whenever I discuss the overlay class, I mean, I'm discussing this, like the class that floats, like basically this class lets you float your widget on top of every other widget. And Flutter, you can make beautiful applications using like when you create a Flutter application, usually the first app you use is the material app, and then it's a hierarchy of these widgets, right? And typically, it's with the material app, the widgets app, or the Cupertino app at the very top. But if you're using Flutter, that means like if your applications is composed of these trees, then that means there have to be leaf nodes, right? And these leaf nodes, if your widget cannot be made of any other widget, then these leaf nodes is what's going to be painting directly to the canvas. The slider and the range slider, since it's not composed of like a button and another node, it's like the slider makes a call to the slider is not the leaf render object, but it makes a call to the leaf render object, and this is what's going to be painting to the canvas. I'm going to try my best to explain this as time goes on, but yeah, the slider pretty much paints directly to the canvas. The slider is a stateful widget which calls like a helper, like a private class called slider render object, which paints directly to the canvas. As I mentioned before, there are two constructors for the slider. The slider, which just gives you the material slider or the Cupertino slider, depending on which package you imported. And there's slider.adaptive, which is going to give you either the material or Cupertino slider, depending on what operating system your client's running on. To implement this, basically, whenever you use the slider.adaptive constructor, there's Flutter is able to detect which platform your client's running on. And basically, if your client's running on Android, Fuchsia, Linux, or Windows, you return the material slider. Otherwise, return the Cupertino slider. The target platform is coming from the foundation package. The foundation package lets you interact with the lowest level utility classes, right? So in this case, the slider was checking which platform the user was running on, but you could also use the foundation package to detect if your client's running on the web or if you're running the app on debug mode or whatnot. So that's what the foundation package is useful for, to get the lowest level utility classes and functions. So now I'm going to discuss the how slider becomes themable. This is pretty common in the material widgets. Basically, if your slider constructor, let's say you're using the slider and in the constructor you set the active color to be pink or something, then the active color of your slider is going to be pink, right? But if let's say you don't override that parameter, then that value is going to be null. And basically, what this does is, since this is null, the constructor, then it's going to go to a slider theme. And the slider theme is typically set in the slider theme is theming the application, right? So for example, usually in the material app, you have a theme parameter and a dark theme parameter, and those parameters take in theme data class, and within that theme data class, you set the slider theme data. And since the material app is at the root of your node, that means all of its descendants, all of its children are going to have that slider theme data. This is an inherited widget, right? So if you ever set the slider theme at any point in your class, in your widgets hierarchy, then the slider implemented is going to use that active track color, right? But if let's say you never set the active track color, then what the slider is going to take is it's the primary color. So the color scheme is primary color, right? And if let's say you don't set the color scheme during in your material app, there's defaults for the color scheme .primary. If I remember correctly, it's going to be blue. So by default, anytime you create your slider and if you don't set any theme data, then your slider is going to be blue because your primary color is going to be blue. And yeah, I think this is a pretty useful concept to know when creating your application, actually. So So if at any point in the hierarchy, if you like, this is going to be common, and you might start doing this more often. But let's say you have a range slider type, and you want to theme it at any point of its hierarchy. In this case, it's only its parents node. Let's say that if the parents node slider theme that is set, so instead of using the regular range value indicator shape, so the range value indicator shape is like the value indicator that pops up. Before it used to be this paddle type, but with like the new iteration of slider, it's like a rectangular box. So let's say you want to use the old value indicator, then you would just set the slider theme data with that shape, and that means any of its descendants is going to have that shape. So even if you don't set it here, that means this range slider is still going to have that shape because you set the slider theme in its widget hierarchy. I think this is pretty cool to know, but even better if you implement it in the Material app, because a lot of us, like nowadays, a lot of people have dark mode on their phone. I personally do use dark mode, but there's some cases where I'm navigating through an application and the application doesn't actually have support for dark mode. So like all of a sudden I'm blinded. If you want to take care of this, then I highly recommend you set your theme and dark theme from the Material app. That way, like let's say you want to have a slider theme that's red for like when your user's running regular, like when your user's running without dark theme, then it's just gonna be a red slider, right? But let's say if your user's is running dark theme, then you want the slider to be darker, right? So in that case, you just set like a navy slider, and that way it adapts to your user's circumstance. And I think I really appreciate it when I'm using my application. So it's something to think about, and it's pretty easy to do. So this is how, like, this is a bit how this is how the slider theme is done within the slider class. Like I mentioned before, you have like an active, like if the constructor is null, then use this as a slider theme parameter. If the slider theme is also null, then it's going to use the color scheme. The slider widget is based off the primary color or some opacity of the primary color. Right there. But like for when the slider is on the disabled state, it uses the on surface color to represent it's disabled, and you can't interact with the thumb. So before Flutter used to be only mobile, so you would only have to cater towards your iOS and Android clients. But Flutter Web is in beta, and since Flutter Web came out, we have to make sure we cater towards our web clients too, right? So to do this, like, you might not think it's law, but for example, when you interact with the thumb here, then you can see that the mouse changes, right? Or also, like let's say you can't see that well, so you have to interact with the keyboard inside the actual screen. So what happens when you get focused into the slider, then you have to take care of that. This is done using the focusable action detector widget. And basically what this does, it gives like your widget, so in this case the slider, but you could do this with any widget you create, and you could align it with keyboard input or have a different mouse type or whatnot. So to handle like web issues, then the focusable action detector is gonna do this for you. So like I mentioned before, in this case, anytime you hover over the thumb and web, then the overlay is going to activate, and the thumb is also going to have a darker shadow. To create web intents, you need to have a keyboard entry and like the intent you're going to be planning on doing. So like callback method that's going to do something for you, right? So the slider, you can interact with the slider using the arrow keys. And the way you do this is by using logical keyboard key and then dot arrow up. And yeah, that's how you are able to grab the system's input. And like I mentioned before, Flutter, in Material, we have to take care of internationalized, like we have to take care of internationalization. So if you read Arabic, then the slider has to start from the right to the left instead of left to the right. And this is taken care of even when you're using the slider using the keyboard entry, like left to right. So now that we talked about keyboard entries, we talked about how we use the services package. The services package gives us the possibility to get like any platform service. So in this case, we're getting like the keyboard entry, and this is typically for web or like native OSs like Linux or whatnot. But like the service package also is going to give you like anything you need. For example, the Android pointer or like Android motion events, or let's say you need to like copy, like let's say you want your client to like if you click a button, it copies it into your clipboard. That's gonna be done with using the services package. And for iOS, like you have access to like the iOS UI view controller using the services package. So it's a pretty cool package in case you need to like grab like use a native service. So now we're going to discuss the value indicator. The value indicator is the component of the slider that shows up when you interact with it. Now this might seem like it's easy to implement, but the value indicator had to be on the overlay. And when you're adding it to the overlay, it gets a bit more complex because the overlay's media query is not the same as the regular media query. So here's like a UML diagram that shows how this was implemented. Basically, in the slider state or the range slider state, the overlay, like there has to be two different classes. There's the slider render object widget, which is made of the other four components. So the thumb, track, tick, and the overlay class. And that's being rendered in by using the render slider or the render range slider, right? But if we want to render the value indicator on top of the overlay, it can't use the same render box because the render box cannot paint on two different media queries. So this was done by creating a different render box for just a value indicator and then adding that render box into the overlay entry. So this might seem like it's a pretty easy task to do, but it was actually pretty complex because like basically anytime I interacted with the slider, the value indicator seemed to be like a frame behind, and we needed to be on the same frame, right? And you can see in this GIF that like this, like the thumb, since it's on the regular slider render box, the thumb goes first and then the value indicator, meaning it was like a frame behind it, and it was a pretty hard issue to solve. The way this we solved this was by creating a callback method, and basically when the rendering was being painted within the slider render box, we set our callback method equal to it. So it's imagine like you're doing a bunch of calculations in the slider render box, and basically once you set that calculation, like in the paint method, you're going to set the callback method equal to this, and it goes back to the state and then goes to the other render box, the value indicator render box, and paints it at the same time. This is done using controllers as well. I can discuss this more thoroughly later at the end of the presentation. So, like I mentioned, like the the value indicator, the way it goes up, it uses the animation package. This animation is being done using an animation controller. That animation controller comes from the animation package. So if you need to deal with like low level animations, like we have, then use the animation package. But there are easier ways to do these animations. If you do it easier way without using this package, I recommend it. Also, when dealing with the animation package, the animation package like works a lot with the physics package, right? So that's how I'm counting the physics package. Basically, the physics package gives you any two-dimensional physics that you have to deal with. Like, so, like let's say you need gravity or something like that. That's being done with the physics package. Another issue that I ran into once the value indicator was on the overlay was the value indicator would not be in the same spot as the rest of the slider because they have different media cores, right? So there had to be a way for the value indicator to communicate with the regular slider render box, right? And this is pretty cool because it was like, it's not the simplest widget, but there's a widget that does this for you, right? And these, well, not widget, there's a widget and class that does this for you. The composite transform target, the composite transform follower, and the layer link widget. Basically, the composite transform target would be equal to like the slider box, and that's what like the target has to follow. And then there's the follower, which would be set to the overlay entry, and the overlay entry would be following the target, and this link is created using the layer link. And it might seem a bit complicated, but what happens if your if like your slider is being used on the tilted platform, then it's really like the composite transform target, composite transform follower, and the layer link handle this issue for you. Okay. So now we're going to do a deeper dive into the Flutter framework. Like I mentioned before, most of us know that Flutter is composed of widgets, and they're either stateful or stateless widget. But in order to get those leaf widgets, there has to be another type of widget. And this is the render object widget. And basically, there's 3 types of render object widgets. By the way, the render object widget is what's going to be painting directly into the canvas. I'll explain the canvas later into the presentation. So the render object widget, there's 3 main types. There's the multi-child render object widget, single-child render object widget, or leaf render object widget. The multi-child render object widget is a widget that takes in, like, that paints into the canvas, but also takes in a list of widgets. So an example of a multi-child render object widget is the column widget. You can input children, and children takes a list of widgets. So a single child render object widget is the same idea as the multi-child render object widget. It just takes one child. So for example, the center widget, I believe, is just a child, has a child parameter, and this is being done using this widget. The last one is if it has no children. So it's a leaf render object widget, and in this case, the leaf, like the slider, has no children. You can't add anything into the slider, so it's not gonna have any children. So the slider is gonna actually use the leaf render object widget. So the leaf render object widget has 2 main methods. It has the create render method, which is create render object method, which is basically gonna just initialize your render box, I guess. And this is similar to a stateful widget, I guess, in the init parameter. And then there's the update render object, which is anytime your widget needs to be like repainted or like the label changed. Like, let's say the system text scale went up in the operating system's settings, then the update render object is going to take care of like repainting it or anything like that. So so the leaf render widget is gonna it has to paint of type render object, right? And then update render object is just gonna update that render object. Render object is a pretty confusing class. It's like you can see right here that it's abstract class render object extends abstract node and all this stuff. We don't have to worry about render object. We're just gonna be like the way the slider is being dealt with. It's a render box, which just extends render object using the box.direct class. Also, our render box is has a mixin, and this mixin is called systems font did change, right? And basically, what a mixin does is like let's say you have a phone, like let's say you have a BlackBerry Pro, right? The BlackBerry Pro has physical keyboard inputs that you can put in. Or let's say you also have an iPhone. The iPhone does not have the keyboard input that the Pro does. So basically, a mixin, like in this case, is like has keyboards, and you like basically you only add the mixin if your phone does have it. So when you're creating an object, when you're creating a class iPhone, then you're not going to be using this mixin to represent the keyboard because the iPhone doesn't have physical keyboards. But if you're using a Pro, then you're going to be using the mixin. In our slider, we're going to be using the mixin system. So we're going to be using the mixin relayout when system fonts change mixin. And basically, this is going to repaint anytime the system fonts changes. So like let's say text color goes up. That's what this mixin does. So our slider is going to be like our render slider is going to be a render box, and it uses this mixin. And yeah, so that's how the render package is being used, because we're using the render box and the render object in our slider class, and then painting our system like Flutter engine painting API. Like we're not using it directly, but the render box does deal with the system, with the painting package. So I went back to this UML to explain it again. So let's say this is anybody just using the widget. All they have to do is worry about the set state, and then they use the slider or range slider, and then the slider range slider has states as well, and then the states call the render object widget, which extends the leaf render object widget, and then the leaf render object widget is gonna call the render slider, and this render slider extends the render box with the mixin. So like this is quite a bit to take in, and it's quite like even the constructor of the render box is pretty massive. This is actually the constructor. If you go to the slider, the slider.dart file, and you go to the constructor render slider, it's a pretty big constructor. We're gonna be talking about 4 main points about the render box. These are the most important points in my opinion, and it also correlates with like the 12 main packages we're talking about. So the main points we're going to be discussing is gestures, scheduler, semantics, and painting. The slider has 2 main gestures. There's the horizontal drag gesture, which basically like you have a pointer, you click on the thumb, you're able to drag it and let go of it. And then the tap gesture is just a quick tap, and the value can show up and go back down, right? And every time you interact with the gesture, then a method is called. There's only 3 main methods. There's handle drag start, handle drag update, and handle drag end. So basically there's all these methods, but all these methods only have 3 types of methods. So handle drag start and handle tap down do the exact same thing, which is like a private method called start interaction. handle drag update updates, like lets you interact with it with the value indicator, and then handle drag end and handle tap up is just a method that calls an and interaction. And this is what's dealing with the gestures of the slider. But this gets a bit complex because these two widgets are also part of this gesture arena team. Like a gesture arena team is basically like your application is composed of a lot of gestures, and the slider has two gestures. These two gestures, the horizontal drag and the tap down, are part of the same team. So anytime the tab is clicked, like that gesture team is activated. And when that gesture is activated, like, and basically the gesture arena team, you can set up a captain basically. And the captain is useful to set because like, so like the captain in this case is a drag gesture, right? And let's say the user taps on the slider first and then drags it. The moment the drag gesture is activated, the tap gesture is no longer activated. The reason this happens is because, like, let's say this wasn't the case. Let's say you let go of the gesture. Then if there's no captain, then both the on tap up call and the handle drag and call are activated if there was no gesture arena team. So like that means this interaction is going to be called twice because there's no team, and if it's called twice, it might lead to unnecessary issues, or it might like lower performance or whatnot. I don't know, but it's basically part of the same gesture arena team. And the captain here is the drag gesture, because anytime the drag gesture is activated, then the tap one, we don't have to worry about ending the tap interaction because the drag interaction is going to take care of that for us. So I mentioned a minute ago that these three widgets have three main calls. So handle drag start and handle tap down are just going to call this private method called start interaction. Handle drag update like just updates the widget, and then handle drag and handle tap up just call this private method called and interaction. In handle drag update, we have to make sure we take internationalization into account. So when the client is when like people are interacting with the slider, then if it's RTL, then it does the opposite thing most people would think. Well, at least for me, because I only know English and Spanish. So yeah, this is an example of like the gestures. So the moment it's clicked, then like the tap gesture is activated. But then since you're dragging it, the moment the drag happens, the captain, the horizontal drag is going to take control, and the tap gesture is no longer going to happen. Like the tap gesture down is no longer going to happen. And then once the horizontal drag is let go, then that's the end of the interaction of the gesture arena team. So gestures are being done using the gesture package. The gesture package deals with like horizontal gestures or vertical gestures, tap down, tap twice, pan gestures, which is both horizontal and vertical. And you deal with this like low-level gesture calls using the gesture package. In the start interaction, so when you click on the slider, the interaction starts, right? That animation is dependent on the time dilation, right? So let's say the time dilation is being slowed down. Like let's say that you just set that in your application, that time dilation is slower, then that animation is going to go way slower. Here's actually an example. So if like this is the Flutter gallery, and then let's say you want to use slow motion, this sets the time dilation slower in your application. So you can see that all the animations are slowed down now. So if I go to slider, the moment I click it, the gesture takes a while. So that's because of this time dilation, and the time dilation, parameter is being set in the scheduler package. The schedule package is responsible for frame callbacks, the most popular one being time dilation. And then the last package that the slider implements is semantics. So semantics is useful in case you use voiceover on your phone to like hear where your slider is, right? In the case of the range slider, since there's 2 thumbs, there has to be custom semantics. That way, you know which thumb you're interacting with. So if you're interacting with in an LTR language, with the left thumb, then that's going to be the smaller thumb. The custom semantics. So if you're interacting with that thumb, it's going to give you. It's going to. The phone is going to tell you decrease min or increase min if you're using the left thumb and you're using a left to right language. But if you're using the bigger thumb, then it's going to give you, your phone's voiceover is going to tell you something different. So this custom semantics is being done using this widget, and this widget comes from the semantics package. So if you want to deal with custom semantics, that's how you deal with it. So now we have all 12 packages. Now we're going to get to painting. So when you're painting the render box, the render box has a few calls you can make, like paint layout, repaint layout, and repaint. And these methods are going to basically call, it's going to tell the slider widget, the slider render box, to rebuild itself pretty much with the new thing, with the new information. And it's not on a clock. It's only called when you're interacting with it. It's reactive. So in the render box, the render box has a method called paint, and within the paint method, you have access to the canvas, right? And basically, the canvas is, you paint into the canvas using 114.ui calls. It's not actually these painting methods is not actually coming from a Flutter package. It's coming from the Dart language. So these 114 calls is going to be pretty much all of Flutter are made with these 114 calls. There are only 114 building blocks, right? The goal here is to give you the best of the best in the sense we don't want to give you we don't want to throw pretty much any API cliffs or API oceans to you, right? By API cliffs, let's say, I mean there's only 60 low-level calls, and you don't have enough to build anything, right? But we don't want to throw you into the ocean where you have too many calls, and basically, you have 10 calls that do the exact same thing, but only 2 of the calls are quick and the other 8 are slow. And it's up to you to figure out that, no, basically these 114 calls, we give you the best parts of the underlying API, and these 114 calls makes calls directly to the Skia engine, and the Harfuzz, the Harfuzz lift shaping library or whatnot. these 114 calls, you have access to that with the Dart UI library. Flutter does not use system OEM widgets given by the OS. So like when you're creating an Xcode project, like you're using the native widgets from the Xcode project. So let's say with the like now that iOS is coming up with the new operating system, then the widgets are being interacted differently. And anytime there's an US, all you have to do in Xcode is just rebuild the package using the new native widgets, and you have access to these widgets, right? That's not how it's done in Flutter. Basically, in Flutter, all you essentially have is a blank canvas, similar to JavaScript, I guess. But like this blank canvas is way quicker, and you have the 114 calls that you make to this blank canvas that create what Flutter is. So yeah. The slider actually doesn't paint directly to the canvas. The slider theme like is creating these low-level calls, and all the slider does is make requests to those slider theme paint methods. So now we're gonna play a little game for those listening. So basically, I want to show you code from these paint methods, and I want you to guess which shape it represents. So just in case you don't remember, the value indicator is this shape. The track is this shape. The thumb is this. The overlay is the thing that's around the thumb, and the tick is for like discrete sliders. So now we're going to go to the code, and I'll give everyone like 10-15 seconds to guess what they think this code represents, and then the next slide will show you what it actually is. Five. So this code represents the track. You can tell because it's creating basically like draw RR rect is a method that lets you draw a rounded rectangle, and we have two calls that. And if you remember, the slider track has like when it's inactive, the slider track is like 2px smaller, and when it's active, then the slider track is bigger. So this code, like these low, like 114, like low level calls, like this code represents the track. So in this case, the active part of the track is 2px bigger than the inactive part of the track. Like you might have read the the object's name, but this object represents the tick. This right there, that's how it's being painted into the canvas with that code. This code is drawing a circle. This code represents the overlay. Again, it might be given since the overlay radius is being named right here. And like that circle just represents this right here. This code is a bit more complex. but this code represents the value indicator. The reason you could tell it's the value indicator is because at the very bottom here, there's label painter paint. And then the label painter is basically what's painting the text information. It's also important to note that when you're doing this paint, the order of operations matter. And basically, the first things you paint onto the canvas are going to be like, let's say, on the bottom of the stack. And as you paint onto the canvas, these new calls, like let's say you draw a circle and then a circle right next to it, then that new circle is going to be on top of the old circle in case you do overlap. So in this case, we want the text to be on top of all the other widgets within the value indicator. So the label painter is the last thing that's being painted. So that code represents the value indicator. And here's the last component. And this is the thumb. You can tell it's the thumb because it has a circle and a shadow. And yeah, so this is the inactive thumb. So that's the slider component from the engineering perspective. And it's a bit complex, but hopefully you understood what I tried to explain. So now we're going to discuss the complications that come with creating the slider widget. As a lot of you know, Flutter is growing pretty rapidly. 1 billion Flutter apps already made. 1 million developers is an important skill to know now. And this is all awesome statistics. Again, just showing you some Flutter stats. The reason I'm showing you this is because Flutter has grown, and because it's grown so much, it's on a lot of devices. So anytime you're making a widget, you have to think of how that widget would be on a different platform, or even like in this case, like the Google Home devices are made with Flutter. So when you, like, let's say you make a PR into Flutter, since it's open source, then that PR is going to affect any device that uses Flutter. So like, and there's a lot of edge cases that we might not think of initially. And one of them could be how would the slider look on a Google Home device? The way we find out about this issue is by the open source community, by the community. The community sometimes is using our application, and then they're using it in an awesome way that we might not have thought of, and we have to take care of this issue now. So here's one example. The slider being used vertically created a problem where the thumb was not easily reachable. Yeah. Here's another example where the slider is coming up within a dialog. So basically, the dialog is showing up on top, and then you can interact with the slider. And then, like, let's say the slider is activated, but then you get out of the dialog. That means the end interaction call was never made. And since the end interaction call was never made, the value indicator is still on the overlay since it was never moved. And every time you use the dialog again, the value, like, a new overlay instance is created, and it stays because it's never removed. There's also cases where, in this case, you see that the value indicator the box is pretty small, but like, let's say the text scaling on the value indicator is much bigger than the track, then you have to handle that as well. And here's another issue, which I think is pretty cool. Someone is working on a slider on the TV, which is really cool in my opinion. And like, usually for slider for web, you interact with the component. Like, if you want to go to the next component, then you just use the tab keyboard, right? And so it'll go from the slider to like a text field input or whatever, but you're able to go to the next widget. But on a TV, you don't have access to the tab key. And let's say once you get into the slider focus, then you're not able to unfocus. So these are cases where we have to take care of, right? So if you're creating a Flutter application and you're interacting with something that doesn't seem right, you can create an issue, and that, like, the issue will be put on Flutter, and hopefully it will be fixed soon too. And also, like, if this is a common issue, the more thumbs up that issue has, the more priority we have to fix it, right? So I highly recommend, if you have an issue and it has, like, it's already known in Flutter, or if it's not known, then create that issue, and then if it is known, just thumbs up it. It's awesome for everyone. So yeah, now you know a little bit more about Flutter, hopefully, and a little bit more about Material and how the Material widgets are made. And yeah, so thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Jose, for all these presentations. I got a little bit of a question, maybe doubt that I have is, Flutter is really open source, right? So everyone can do their own contributions and stuff. How, quotes, open source is material design? Could people do their own proposals for new widgets? Is it Google doing all those stuff? Or no, it's just material design is an interior thing from Google. You cannot touch it. We will deal with it. Yeah, if you can expand into that one.
To my knowledge, basically, Material is a Google design system. If there's, I think a lot of it's done like with a mix of it. Like, I think it's some from designers mostly, but I think if you want to put your own input, you can. But I'm not too sure. I'll put that in as a question, and then I'll confirm with you with my team and let you know. Sorry, I don't have an answer for that.
No problem. But all the internally, you guys have pretty much like a set of like run up of where which widgets you want to build. Maybe there are like someone missing, but you already have your, I'm pretty sure, your round of like roadmap of the things that needs to be done for Flutter. Why not? And if not, again, I don't know if there's any proposals for people to actually showcase those stuff. But if not, I don't know if, like, I'm pretty sure they have a roadmap, right, on the internal.
Like for example, in my case right now, I'm working. I know the slider widget pretty well because I'm working on the slider. Like, that's on my roadmap. Yeah. I've been dealing with slider for like, I think 3 months now.
Just to give it a heads up for a lot of people, maybe doing a startup, in 3 months they have to build an app. But for big companies to make sure that it's quality, only the sliders take in 3 months.
Yeah, and I've been doing it on Flutter side, but there's other platforms, like I mentioned, like on web and whatnot. So I guess that's a good thing about being in a big company. Like we can make sure we give us, like, we can focus on making sure this widget's good, and all these different use cases, because we have the resources to do that, right, at a bigger company.
And other doubt that I'm pretty sure a lot of people have is, the material team also doing the Cupertino stuff, or there is another team called Cupertino team or something like that inside Google?
So no. So basically, I'm in the material team, and that's just the Google design system, right? But Cupertino package is being done. So basically, the Flutter team has its own team that like deals with like those libraries, right? And like there's its own team in the Flutter team that deals with the Flutter Cupertino library.
Because I'm pretty sure that a lot of the things that you do, and I would call it business logic related to the Cupertino, to the material slider, I'm pretty sure they're super useful for the Cupertino as well, right? A lot of things will be kind of shared, because if they're using kind of part of the sliders or the canvas drawing and stuff, I know it could change a little bit the colors and the depth, but all the work and effort that you put on it could be really used by the Cupertino side of it, and just finish that one faster than if they both have in their own side doing it, all those details, right?
Well, we work pretty like for example, I interact on a daily basis with like the Flutter framework TL pretty much. Anytime I submit a PR into Flutter, we gotta make sure that it not only gets it, like we need LGTMs from my team beforehand, but also the TL from the person that pretty much created the Flutter framework has to make sure it's good too. So he's also in charge of making sure that the Cupertino library meets certain standards. And if you look at the Cupertino and the material slider, they do have a lot of similarities.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure, well, a lot of people, they use their app as a material app. You know, like you start a Flutter application, the first thing you do is put material app. Not a lot of people put Cupertino app because a lot of material app already, when you start doing it, and if you not specify a lot of stuff, they will use a lot of, you will say, user experience and user interface from iOS, even if you don't set up with a material app. Is it that material has such a, I will say, power inside Flutter, or they're thinking about the idea, maybe Flutter should have their own, I don't know, widget app instead of material app, you know? Instead of Cupertino app, material app, having like a widget app, and the user decide later if they want to use specific widgets from one and a specific widget for others.
Well, that's actually, like, there is a widgets app, and basically the widget app is pretty much wrapped with any material information. And then like the Cupertino app is pretty much the widget app wrapped with any Apple information. So there's like, if you want an unbiased like design system feel to it, then use the widget app.
Got it. But you will lose all the like the in responses. Like if you tap something, you won't have the like the splash and all the stuff. I'm pretty sure you will lose all those details, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's really useful because a lot of people take it for granted. They just use material app because I think every single open source and even apps that you see around, it's like everyone uses material app. So maybe people think that, okay, maybe Flutter is by default material app, and no, the default is actually widget app. But you gain so many things with the material app, like the splashes and all the details and the signs, and because it looks good on web as well, so you don't have to put any effort to make it like a web beautiful, because material already provides this beautiful design. But yeah, I guess a lot of people have that doubt. It's like, why so default material app? But I guess it's all the benefits in the UI related stuff. But yeah, if you want to create your own UI, I think Flutter is, I always say, the best platform to create your own custom UI, because Android is a hassle. It's a tremendous issue to create your own custom UI. And let's just not talk about iOS because they're really focused on their own UI. So
yeah. And like you can, like I mentioned, the theming thing, like you can set the dark theme and the light theme mode within the app. I think that's a pretty cool feature, that like your entire widget hierarchy is gonna have this theming already by default. You know, I think that saves a lot of time too.
Got it. And you also, I'm pretty sure when the light and dark theme was that, I'm pretty sure it wasn't from the very beginning, but as soon as they, hey, we need to implement this dark theme as well, that affects you, because you have to change the theme, you have to change the color, you need to make sure that the contrast of the canvas drawing the path of the slider, it needs to have a good contrast on the darker screen, and it has to make sure that, of course, the white one keeps like a good contrast as well. So that involves you doing all that business, or someone else have to deal with the whole theming thing?
A lot of theming is done, like pretty much it is my team's responsibility to do a lot of this stuff, and we're going through this actually pretty big, like this like if you go to like flutter.dev/go, you can see a lot of like the work that's being done, right?
Proposals, yeah.
Proposals, and you'll see like how we're planning on making theming better, because theming has gotten pretty complex now that there should be a better way to theme.
Yeah, even for myself, like if you really want the default, you just set up both themes and that's it, and they will take care. You don't have to touch any details in terms of colors and stuff. But as soon as you customize a little bit, then you're like done. Then you need to do the whole either inheriting widget or provider to implement your own custom like colors and shapes and stuff. And that's like, I would say it's like, I wish it was more simple. Inherited widget, it was an issue for me because I thought it was like, I thought it was gonna be a little bit easier just to switch like a boolean and that's it. It changed the colors, but it involved a lot of code. And with provider, it was a little bit easier because the way provider is already done. So you can easily have a consumer with exactly that, with a boolean value, and I have a theme, And if it checks a Boolean, it's either one way or the other. Use a ternary operator, and you get either one color or the other color. So for those who don't know how to change the theme, follow those examples with Provider, because they provide a way easier implementation than using inheriting widgets, similar to implement theming. If you really want to create something custom, because if you really want the stock, I will say there is a really good job. You don't have to do anything. You need to add the Dart theme and you're good to go. Everything related, backgrounds, text, all the stuff, even buttons, they really take care about their own, pretty much.
Yeah, there's also this idea I think that a lot of people find useful. That I'll show you. It's basically this idea that I think would be like it's initially when I started, but if people thumbs up it, I think there's a chance that it could be worked on more. And basically, application where like it's just like a dummy screen where you can interact with it, and you set like the primary color and whatnot, and you can set the fonts. The moment I click fonts, a bunch of fonts come, and it takes a while for them to load. But like I think it'd be really cool to implement something this, but like this is just a proof of concept idea, right? And it's just and it's able to download like the app theme data.
Oh, that's really clever. So you pretty much you go to the website, you make sure that you have all your theme really quick on the web or something like that, and you just like copy paste into your code, and that's it. You have the themes, right?
Yeah, I think
that's really clever.
This is something I think would be really useful because
yes,
like theming is a very important part of the application. I think implementing something like this would be awesome. So
I think a lot of people don't know, because sometimes you feel like, oh yes, I wanted to change the color of the slider, and maybe they're searching for the variable color, and that's it. But they don't think about the splash color, the highlight color, and all those details. That it's like, why is my slider looks blue, yellow, red, and all at the same time? Because you didn't thought about all the different colors that may happen. It happens to me. I was changing, I think it was a slider as well. No, it was a button that I changed into the dark theme, and it looks so bad because I forgot about doing the highlight as well. I did the splash, but I didn't do the highlight, and the highlight looks so awful. And making sure I have platforms like this one, that if you have a shade of red, you have all the different shades of red or whatever color. And if that provides for you the theme with all those things being set up, that will be super helpful for people, because some people really don't think about all these small little details that make a specific widget, right? The only thing that's what they see, and that's it. But they forgot about the splash, they forgot about the highlight, they forgot about the elevation, maybe the elevation color, and all those stuff. And there's specific colors for each one of those.
Yeah, exactly. So like, for example, shapes would like you'll be able to interact with like let's say there'll be a slider theme shape, and then you can set the slider theme shape, and it'll show up here, and it'll show you how the slider looks. So yeah, nice. That's the idea. I think I really would like to see if we can get this rolling if possible.
Yeah, that would be amazing. I would really use those ones, because I think about the dark mode or my own theme, and I was like, now I have to make like a massive thing that I need to remember. Okay, which thing I use? Did I use riser buttons? Did I use material buttons? Did I use the sliders? Did I use the toggles? And now I have to think, I need to customize so many things. And you ended up in a road that you didn't scale it well at the beginning. So if you do so, either you start wrapping individual widgets until you realize that doesn't scale, and then it will be better to have a theme for this. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, that's it, easier, just copy paste, download it, paste it on your project, done. You're good to go.
Yeah, I'm happy.
Will this involve all the material widgets, at least sliders, toggles, floating action buttons, toolbars, and all those stuff, or like specific ones?
Well, any of the material widgets that can be themable. So
okay. Oh, nice. Yeah.
So not all widgets are themable yet, but like you'll see that these, like some of them don't have themes, but some of them do.
Okay, that's perfect. Yeah. Looking forward. I will use it myself, because that will really fix a lot of the issues that sometimes I have down the road. I remember when I did the clone because I clone a lot of apps, and when I did the clone of Spotify, I realized that the slider, it was really useful to do all the volume and the music seeker, right? But I realized how different the thickness of the element was for the slider, and I was like, oh. And then I started investigating because I thought it was a variable for the slider and not to grab it on a slider theme. So I spent a huge amount of hours, well, I won't say hours, but a hundred of minutes like searching. It was like, what am I doing wrong? Why this doesn't change the thickness and stuff? Until I realized and I started reading about the slider theme. I was like, oh, I see, I get it. And that was like in 1 second, I was able to make all the changes. And I think a lot of people don't know that. And if having like a tool like this one that once they check the code, I was like, oh, I didn't know they have like all these small little details in terms of theming, right? Some people think that theming is just, yep, one color, that's it, fix it, done, I'm done.
Yeah, this is like,
yes, it's massive. The amount of like details that it creates that UI is just not just a slider. It involves a huge amount of stuff.
yeah,
And again, like you show it, if it has the indicator of the value, if not, if it's by sections, if it's not, if it has a minimum or not, if it's people maybe later doing their own custom canvas to make it like 360, like if it was a circular one. There's like so many stuff involved in how to make like a widget, right?
yeah. There's like for even with the custom slider, you can like create your own custom value indicator.
Yeah.
You can customize it pretty well, like the thumbs and whatnot.
Yep. Yeah. I said, yeah. Again, I think this detail is amazing because I think the slider is one of those, I would say, smaller ones because people they're used it really specific, either for music seeking or if they need a specific, let's just say you can use a range if you have an app that it needs to search between ranges of prices and all the stuff, which is really useful. And all the work that involves doing just a slider, in quotes, it's just a slider. It's like involve a lot of stuff. So I cannot imagine all the other widgets. Like I'm pretty much imagining one person for the toggle. I can't imagine one person for the toolbar and the app bar. I was like, damn, that's a lot of people.
Yep, I'm the slider guy. I know the slider by heart at this point. So I've been working with a lot of slider tickets. There's a lot of them right now, and like for example, there's a ticket right now where what have like the sliders on top of a gesture detector. So there's two gesture detectors upon each other. So that's creating problems. So I'm trying to fix that now.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I think that's it. We're being almost for an hour and a half. That's I think there's a lot of people. Thank for being for such a long time with us watching and seeing. I see that some people give likes on the video. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jose. I'm not sure if you're used to, but for us, it's the first time that we have a Googler on the event. So thank you so much for being here and just to provide a lot of knowledge of how the widget is done.
Thank you very much. Thank you for setting this up. I hope.
Yeah.
Like I know it was a lot to take in, but again, hopefully all you have to do is use the widget material work with package. But like at least this gives you the exposure in case you ever do want to play around with it to a higher depth.
Or even encourage people to go to, if they have an issue, either create a GitHub issue so people can see it and fix it quickly, or even yourself, if you really feel confident about doing your own PRs, please do, because a lot of contributions come from the community. So if you really have a PR who fixes an issue that maybe no one else saw, or maybe you saw the how to fix it really quick, create a PR. Google team's got to be on it, and I'm pretty sure if it's like really hard one, or like maybe this needs to be fixed ASAP, we can just call whatever. We can call Philip, we can call whatever, Andrew, or someone in charge that they can rank it up really fast so they goes to the next release and make sure and if it is so, sometimes it could be in the middle that the issue went through master and avoiding getting through stable, right? Because sometimes it happens that issue that some bug landed to master, no one saw that one, it goes to dev, beta, and all those stuff, and it ended up on a stable. And there's so many layers before that some people can catch it before that issue happens, and maybe we can fix it.
Yeah, we always recommend if anyone can contribute, that's awesome.
Yep. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day. And the next events, of course, I will let you know through the social media and stuff. But again, thank you so much, Jose, for all the effort.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.